Welcome in. It's the MMQB podcast with Albert Breer, our YouTube edition. Appreciate you guys coming out here on the Periscope. This will be up on YouTube and iTunes a little later today. I'm going to answer all of your questions on Periscope. So everybody who's jumping on now via Twitter, you will get answers to every question that you've got after I get through the 5 news topics coming out of the weekend. And there is no place that I can start coming out of what was a wild weekend at all levels of football than with the University of Tennessee's coaching search. And I know it's not an NFL story, but we're going to start there. And part of the reason I want to start there is because I just did a story on Greg Schiano. It was up on the MMQB.com. You can check it out there. It's my weekly draft column. Figured you can't do a column that's even associated to college football without addressing this, so we decided to lead the column with it. And my assignment was basically to write what I know about Greg Schiano, having covered him, having been around him a bunch, and write what I think the University of Tennessee is missing. And so I didn't mean it as a huge endorsement of Greg Schiano, although I think he would have been a good choice for the University of Tennessee. I just wanted to kind of illustrate who he is as a guy, what he's like, and what I think that the University of Tennessee will miss by not having him, which is a guy who will instill structure and discipline and all of that stuff. So you guys can check that out on the mmqb.com. There's only really one thing that I had a problem with among of everything that happened over the weekend that I thought was unfair. Okay? If you don't think that Greg Schiano is a fit in Knoxville, that's totally fair. If you don't think he's a fit in the SEC, I get it. I understand. Those jobs are different. In the South, when you're at the head football coach at a flagship state university, you're a quasi-politician. And would Greg have been a fit there? I don't know. He's a projection because in New Jersey at Rutgers, that wasn't part of the job. That's not who you are. And so no one knows because we didn't get a chance to see it. We haven't seen what that looks like. We can all make our guesses about what it would look like, whether or not he'd be successful. I think he did a fantastic job at Rutgers. That place was an absolute graveyard before he got there. The worst program in college football, and he was able to resurrect that place. And I thought it was a lot like what Bill Snyder was able to pull off at Kansas State, maybe a little bit like what Frank Beamer did at Virginia Tech, where just rose the program from the ashes. And, you know, like more Kansas State than Virginia Tech because this was a place where football just didn't matter. And so we can argue about all of that. And there are fair points to be made on both sides, totally fair points to be made on both sides. The one thing that I had a problem with that I thought was unfair was using the Penn State case, which is undoubtedly the worst case, the worst sports scandal of my lifetime, worse than anything, like just like disgusting, like every adjective you could possibly want to associate with that. You can't go too far when you're talking about how bad the Penn State situation was. Okay. What I had a problem with was people using that case as a pawn in order to get what they wanted. And I'm not saying everybody did it. I don't think everybody did it. But I think there was an element where people were using that case as a pawn to kick and scream and make sure that Greg Schiano would not become the coach at the University of Tennessee. On top of that, additionally, this is one of those things, man, where if you're going to accuse somebody of something like that, you better know for sure. And I don't know, and you know what? You don't know. And if you're going to accuse him of covering up something like that, you better have some real hard evidence. And so the real problem that I had with what happened over the weekend was, A, people using that case, again, the worst sports scandal of my lifetime, using that case as a pawn in a game to make sure that a football coaching hire didn't go the way they didn't want it to. And B, taking someone's name and attaching just awful, awful accusations to that guy's name without knowing for sure. And look, if he was guilty of that, punish him to the full extent of the law. I just thought what everybody had on him was paper thin. I mean, it was hearsay of hearsay. And yes, it was in sworn testimony. But again, that's one of those things where if you're going to accuse someone of that, you're going to scream from the mountaintops that this is what he is. You better be damn sure. Now, I will say that if your point here is I don't want anyone associated with that, the same way a lot of people have said, like, I don't want anybody associated with Baylor. And Art Briles is a different level. Art Briles was the head coach at Baylor. This is a 25-year-old graduate assistant. But no matter what, like, if you say I don't want anyone associated that was there for that, I don't want anybody who is attached to Paterno-era Penn State, I understand that. That's different than accusing him of something like this, and that's different than using the Penn State case as a pawn to, again, try to dictate a football coaching search. And so that's my only point there. Again, we can argue whether or not he would have been a good hire. I think he would have been a good hire as the next University of Tennessee head coach. Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. I'm not telling you that the University of Tennessee was on the verge of hiring Nick Saban or Urban Meyer, because that's not what this was. He didn't come in with a resume that Nick Saban entered Alabama with. He didn't come in with a resume that Urban Meyer entered Ohio State with. So this was not a slam dunk, grand slam homer, or grand slam hire. But there's just things that happen over the course of the weekend that irk me a little bit. So number two, back to the NFL. I think one of the underrated stories of this coming weekend is what exactly we're going to see from Josh Gordon. And we've all read this story. There's one in Sports Illustrated this week. There was the GQ Q&A that came out a couple weeks ago. Josh Gordon's case is among the saddest and it's just like a gigantic waste of talent, like it felt that way. And I've talked to people and I know the things that the Browns did to keep him in line in 2013. I mean, literally hiring coaches to handle him and a small number of other players who when Joe Banner's team came in there, felt like this group there's a small group of players that we're going to have to manage. So they brought in sports psychologists to handle them on a day-to-day basis. And they kept their thumb on top of him. And he wound up having one of the best years a young receiver has ever had. And 1,600 yards, and he missed 2 games. Absolutely off the charts. So what do you expect from him? Well, there's a little piece of evidence here that I don't think anybody should ignore going into this week with Josh Gordon returning to the field. Okay? Just a little piece of evidence. Okay, so in 2016, he was cleared for a short time. He went to training camp with the Browns, played in 2 preseason games. In those 2 preseason games, okay, this is a guy who hadn't been on a football field in almost 2 years. 5 catches, 116 yards, and then there was a 44-yard touchdown. He looked like a man among boys again. And I still remember the first time I saw him play in person. I was covering a game for NFL Network. It was the Browns and the Patriots in 2013. And he's one of those guys, when you see him in person, it looks different. And Aqib Talib was covering him that day and ran a simple post, and Talib couldn't keep up with him. And Talib's a big corner, and Talib looked small next to him. And then you saw, and I'm sure you can find this on YouTube or NFL.com or wherever you want, it's a long touchdown Gordon scored against the Patriots. Just watch the way he pulls away from Aqib Talib, who is one of the best corners of the last 10 years in the NFL. Just watch the way that he, after he catches the ball, 5 yards turns into 10 yards. 10 yards turns into 15 yards as far as the separation from the receiver to the defensive back. And so he's a guy who's a physical freak. There's that evidence from 2016 that you want to say guys can't just flip a switch and come back. And with 99% of players, I would say that. There's going to be a lot of rust to knock off. What's he got? Is it possible that he's going to be able to just step right back out? But we have evidence that he can from a couple of years ago or from a year and a half ago. So, and he looks like he's in better shape. People I've talked to there say he's in the best shape they've ever seen him. And so my player to watch in Week 13 is a guy who's playing for nothing more than they're not playing for the playoffs. They're not playing for positioning in the division. Not playing for any of that. But I think Josh Gordon playing for the Browns this week. And the Browns are in, and I should have the schedule up, right? The Browns are traveling to Los Angeles to play the Chargers. I think the Chargers win that game, but keep an eye on Josh Gordon. Okay, number 3. And this is coming off of the game last night. And it's interesting because I watched the Ravens, and this is a defense that's shut out 3 opponents, and they look championship ready on defense. Like, maybe they're not the 2000 Ravens. Maybe they're not even the 2012 Ravens, but they're talented, they're deep, they're fast, they're big. All the draft picks that they've invested on that side of the ball over the last few years are starting to pay off. Their corners, between Jimmy Smith, who's a top 5 corner in the NFL right now, Brandon Carr, and the rookie Marlon Humphrey are outstanding. They can get after the passer with Terrell Suggs. They've got one of the best off-the-line linebackers in football in C.J. Mosley. They've got a Swiss Army knife of a safety in Tony Jefferson. They've got one of the best run stuffers in football in Brandon Williams. They look like they're in a championship window. And you know what? Their offense, I don't think, is there. And look, the offensive line's been an issue, no question about it. But I'm going to give you guys some numbers. If you have a pen, take these down. Okay? Joe Flacco's holding the Ravens back. This is a guy who's signed contracts twice to make him the highest paid player in football. Okay? Twice he's signed a contract. In 2013 and then again in 2016 that made him the highest paid player in the National Football League. Okay? Last 3 years, his passer rating. This is from 2015 to 2017, so it's post Gary Kubiak in Baltimore. 81.1 quarterback rating. That ranks him 34th among qualifying quarterbacks. The 33rd qualifying quarterback is Blake Bortles. That's one spot above Joe Flacco. 32nd, Trevor Siemian. 31st, Colin Kaepernick. Okay? 81.1 rating. All right, so you want to extend that a little bit. You want to go back and you want to include the Kubiak year, right? The Kubiak year was a good year for him. Kubiak does a great job with quarterbacks. It's been shown over the years. You can go all the way back to Jake Plummer, more recently Matt Schaub in Houston, and then the guys he had in Denver, managing a broken Peyton Manning, a guy who was on his last legs, getting what he did out of Brock Osweiler, and then getting what he did out of Trevor Siemian last year. Okay? So this is including the Kubiak year. This goes back, so this covers the 5 years since he became the highest paid player in football after winning Super Bowl 47. So since then, he has an 81.4 quarterback rating. That ranks 37th in the NFL. Okay? 33rd is Mike Glennon. 34th is Trevor Siemian. 35th is Case Keenum. 36th is Robert Griffin III. Now, here's what's really interesting about that. That's Robert Griffin III, not including his rookie year. So that great rookie year he had, that's post-knee injury Robert Griffin, has a higher passer rating over the last 5 years than Joe Flacco. And look, I know that they've had issues at the skill positions. I know Brashard Perriman hasn't worked out. I know they've got offensive line issues. But you look at his quarterback ratings over the last 5 years, 74.2 this year, 83.5 last year, 83.1 in 2015, 91 in 2014, 73.1 in 2013. This is the highest paid. This was for a chunk of that 5-year stretch, the highest paid player in the sport. And on Monday night, 20 of 32, 141, no touchdowns, no picks. This is going to be an interesting one to watch because, again, the Ravens defense, we saw it again on Monday night, is championship ready. And I told you the circumstances that Joe Flacco is under, right? The receiver position's taken some hits. The offensive line's had some injuries. But what do we know about the best quarterbacks in the league? And I'm talking about, look, if you look at Brees and Brady over that 3-year stretch, 15 to 17, their quarterback ratings, and these guys in their late 30s, their quarterback ratings are more than 20 points higher than Joe Flacco's. Quarterbacks like that have to lift up everybody around them. That's how you justify your pay. You get paid that way, well, you're going to cost the team a player or two on the back end, a good player or two on the back end. And the best quarterbacks can make up for it. And I think what we're learning about Joe Flacco now is that he's pretty good and pretty clutch when everything's right around him, but he can't exactly lift everybody else up. Okay. Number 4, the Broncos, Aqib Talib, Michael Crabtree. We saw what happened, and I think the penalty is justified, okay? And I'll make this quick. The reason why is because those two guys knew that they were going to be watched. They knew there was one thing they couldn't do, right? They knew there was one thing they couldn't do. We can't fight with each other. If we fight with each other, then we're going to get caught because they're watching us. And so we can't fight with each other. And what do? It took them about 30 seconds to start fighting with each other. And this is why I don't blame the league. And look, you guys have heard me go after the league for sanctions in the past. I do not blame the league for the sanctions at all here. The league did what it had to do. By fighting, Michael Crabtree and Aqib Talib are basically raising their middle finger to the league office and saying, you know what, screw you. We don't care about you. We're going to go do what we want to do. And so that being that, I guess, again, suspension's warranted for Aqib Talib and Michael Crabtree. It's interesting watching the Broncos melt down in this situation. And I want to take you back to Brian Billick's last year in Baltimore. And one of the reasons why Brian Billick was fired in Baltimore, and that paved the way for John Harbaugh to wind up there. They had struggled to put a competent offense together year after year after year. And it started to get to the defense. And we've seen this with defense-heavy teams in the past. I mean, this goes back to my childhood. I mean, you guys all remember, those of us who were alive, the Bears in the 80s, those defenses in some cases hated the offenses. And then Buddy Ryan goes to the Eagles, and it's the same thing. Great defenses. And they wound up resenting the offense because the offense couldn't play to their level. The offense was keeping them from championships. This tends to happen with defense with teams that are unbalanced to the defensive side, that are very good on defense and not nearly as good on offense. And I feel like this has been brewing for the last year and a half in Denver ever since Peyton Manning retired, where the defense carried them to that championship and Super Bowl 50, and now that defense is starting to feel the weight of having to carry the team over the last 3 years. And the offense is shuffling through first Trevor Siemian, and then Brock Osweiler, and now Paxton Lynch. Paxton Lynch is hurt. And so now it's back over to Trevor Siemian. And eventually that winds up getting to a defensive group. And I think that is absolutely what's part of what's happening in Denver. Because that wasn't just Aqib Talib on Sunday. Those guys were all ready to scrap. All of them. They were all right there. There was no hesitation. Oh, there's a fight over there? What's the fastest way for me to get over to that fight? What's the fastest way for me to get over there so I can throw some hands? That's what that was. We saw it. That's what the Broncos are dealing with. The Broncos are that team now. And it's something that I think has been brewing there for a little while with all the strong personalities they've got on defense. And chief among them is the guy who was right in the thick of it, number 21, Aqib Talib. But there is that frustration there. And it'll be interesting to see. It'll be a huge test of Vance Joseph's ability to lead now. I don't care about the X's and O's the rest of the way. They're out of it, right? Like, what does that team look like now going forward? Starting this week at the Dolphins, who've been a dumpster fire on their own right. In their own right. Like that, like what is that team going to look like going forward now? I'm going to be fascinated to watch that one. Okay, number 5. My game of the week for this week. I think it's everybody's game of the week for this week. Eagles Seahawks Sunday Night Football in Seattle. Look, I'm going to say a couple things about these two teams, then I'm going to start answering your questions on the Periscope. Okay, so I've said a lot of nice things about the Eagles going all the way back to the first week of September when I picked them to win the NFC East. And the reason I picked them to win the NFC East is because I felt like Howie Roseman and Joe Douglas and that personnel staff had done such a good job of building up the lines of scrimmage, and that they'd invested in the offensive line and they'd kept offensive linemen around like Jason Peters, even though they had the left tackle and waiting on the other side, and Lane Johnson, and they pay Lane Johnson. I almost said Lane Kiffin there. Jason Kelsey at center. They bring in depth pieces on the offensive line. They draft Big V, who's there in position to replace Jason Peters. When Jason Peters goes down, they invested on the defensive line in a group that already had Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham and Vinnie Curry. You bring in Timmy Jernigan. You bring in Chris Long. You bring in Derek Barnett. And so I love the way their team was built. Good environment for a young quarterback to be in. And here's the latest nice thing I'm going to say about the Eagles. I love the focus over the last couple of weeks. Okay? They go in and they play a Dallas team on a Sunday night that's down. That's lost Ezekiel Elliott, that's sort of wandering around trying to find its way. And you know what you got to do to a team like that? You got to step on its throat right away. You got to demoralize them right away. And the Eagles absolutely took the wind out of the Cowboys. They win that one 37-9. And this week they play the Bears at home. I think it was like end of the second quarter before the Bears had a first down. It's a bad team coming in there without a whole lot to play for. What do? You break their spirit. So the Eagles broke their spirit. So I like the focus the last 2 weeks where you're playing two vulnerable teams and you go in and you say, you know what? Our focus is where it needs to be. And they go in and they choke those two teams out. And this isn't like, a sleepy 24-14 win. 37-9 beatdown over Dallas and a 31-3 rout of Chicago. And so I like where the Eagles are going into Seattle, and this is going to be a great test for the Seahawks. Because I don't think the Seahawks are going to be able to hold Carson Wentz to 10 points or 14 points. For the Seahawks, I think this is a test of them being able to morph into something else and become something else. And the Seahawks are going to have to learn to win a different way. The Seahawks led the league in scoring defense 4 years in a row. 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015. In 2016, I believe they were third in that category. They're not up there anymore. They're not going to be able to win games the same way without Richard Sherman and Cam Chancellor. It doesn't mean they're not still a good team. But this will be a good test of it because Russell Wilson and that offense are going to have to score on a good defense, on the Philadelphia defense, at home with playoff positioning on the line. So I can't wait for that one. Fantastic Sunday night game we get there. I'm going to answer all of your questions now. Why don't we say we'll go for about 10 minutes. I'll answer every question that you guys have on Periscope. Then we'll get out of here. I appreciate you guys coming out. Tell all your friends about what we're doing here every Tuesday morning. All right, question number one. Can you see Schiano as a candidate at FSU if open? What about as a DC in the NFL? I could see him potentially eventually being a defensive coordinator in the NFL. I don't think a college is going to hire him now based on the way that everything happened with the Tennessee situation over the weekend. Jimmy G starting. I think that's 50-50 right now. How do you think the 49ers will use their first-round pick? I think they will wind up trading out of their first-round slot and trying to accumulate picks. The quarterback situation, one way or another, is going to be resolved. Either it's going to be Jimmy Garoppolo or they're going to make some sort of move for Kirk Cousins. I think that the likelihood is that it'll be Jimmy Garoppolo going forward. What I think is interesting is that they could wind up there at number 2. That could wind up being Josh Rosen, right? And so now you can start to go back and accumulate draft capital. You can replace that second-round pick that you lost in the Garoppolo trade. The 49ers are in a great spot when it comes to the draft. More questions. And we'll try to do these rapid fire. Jacksonville for real or a pretender? Jacksonville is for real everywhere but quarterback. They've been able to do a good job managing around their quarterback. I love the running game. I like that they've invested in the offensive line and drafting Cam Robinson and paying their center. I like what they've done on the defensive line. That's a good team for a veteran quarterback to walk into next year. If I'm someone like Kirk Cousins, I look at Jacksonville and say that might be the best football situation out there. Do you think Dez walks this offseason? No, although his ability to run, and we've talked about this a few times on the podcast on Friday mornings, we're not sure. Can he still run? I think is the big question. So do the Cowboys ask him to go take a pay cut? I think he values being in Dallas, though. So I have a hard time seeing him not be on the Cowboys. Billy Price fit the Niners offense? Absolutely. Kyle Shanahan, that center position is really important for Kyle Shanahan. That's why when he got to Atlanta, it was important for them to bring in Alex Mack. You want a smart center? That's what Billy Price is. You want a guy who can move? That's what Billy Price is. He'd be a great fit in San Francisco. The question is, do you spend that high a pick on a center? And the 49ers would probably have to spend a low first-round pick to get him, which they won't have. They'd have to trade up to go and get him. What went in with Pagano yesterday? That was a weird situation. Yes, I think he's probably gone this year. Surprised that Tomlin was mentioning the Pats. No, I'm not surprised by that. And I don't think it's going to make much of a difference when we get to December 17th or whatever it is when those two teams are going to play at Heinz Field or in the AFC Championship game potentially. Marvin Lewis's last year, I think the chance now is as good as any year. The name to watch there would be potentially Hugh Jackson coming back if he gets fired in Cleveland. The Bengals over the last few years have given Marvin Lewis one-year extensions. That's the thing that you want to pay attention to. They continue to give him one-year extensions going into seasons. They didn't do that before this year, so this is a true contract year for him, so they can walk away from him without any financial obligation after this year. Is that all you guys got? There's still over 100 of you here. Is Ertz a top 3 tight end? I don't think somebody's close. Should Dallas move on from Jason Garrett? The answer to my question is no. Is there a candy pumpkin in that pumpkin over your shoulder? Yes, there is, and I go there a lot. Browns get a win. Not this week against the Chargers. Chargers are too hot. Am I the only one that thinks Malik Jefferson has Defensive Player of the Year potential? I liked watching Malik Jefferson play at Texas. I've been told he's not a first-rounder. NFC South winner. It doesn't mean he's not a second or third rounder, just not that he's a first-rounder. NFC South winner. Right now, still sort of like the Panthers because of the defense. That to me is the best race in the league. The Saints, the Panthers, and the Falcons are really even. Can Pittsburgh make it to the Super Bowl? Yes, Pittsburgh can make it to the Super Bowl. What's the name of the dog walking around there? I don't know. Will, do you know what the dog's name is? I've been meaning to ask about that dog too, so I'm not sure what the name is. Jets quarterback, I think, will either be a rookie or Kirk Cousins next year. NFC South, best division right now. Yeah, I think you'd have to say so. The AFC West was coming into the year, but it's not anymore. Who would you rank as the top 3 rookie running backs of last year's class so far? I mean, Kamara's got to be there, right? So maybe Kamara, Fournette, and Mixon. It's a really good class because you put Dalvin Cook there if he wasn't hurt. It's not like McCaffrey's been bad. It's a great class. And Kareem Hunt isn't even in the conversation anymore. 49ers have the cap room. Who would they target? Obviously, a hard question to answer. Yeah, I haven't really looked at the free agent list at that level yet, but they'll have over $100 million in cap room. Will the AFC South have 3 winning teams next year? Well, Jacksonville and Tennessee are over 500 this year, and then you've got Houston, who's going to be coming back with Deshaun Watson, potentially Indianapolis coming back with Andrew Luck. You could see a scenario in the next year or two where that's a really strong division, and it's been one of the worst in football forever. QB, the quarterback, the Patriots can target next year's draft. Who would fit them? That's a good question. Let me come back to that. Who do you think Dak is legit? The question is what you mean by legit. Is he a player that can carry a team? Clearly at this point he's not. Is he a player where if everything's right around him you can win with? I think he is that. We're still figuring out who he is because his circumstances have changed so much. Last year he was in a perfect situation for a rookie quarterback. They were because of Zeke Elliott in that running game, they were constantly in 2nd and 6 and 3rd and 2. Now circumstances have changed on him a little bit. And so I think that's where you see some of the growing up happening that's going to need to happen. I actually think Dak could wind up benefiting from going through this next year. I really like a lot of things about him as a quarterback, but he wasn't ready to carry a team yet. Most quarterbacks in their second year aren't ready to carry a team yet, so that puts him in a category with a lot of other guys. Having to be in that position and failing a little bit in that position, I think will help him going forward. 5 more questions, then we'll get out of here. What do we got? 5 more questions? 5 more questions? There's still over 100 of you. Number 1, will Alex Smith still be an NFL starter next season? Yes, he will be a starter somewhere. I don't think it'll be in Kansas City. I think that Patrick Mahomes is going to be the starter there anymore. I said 5. That was 1. Let's go, Periscope. 4 more. There's still 117 of you. Next season, I don't know what you're asking about next season. 49er fan. 4 more. Was Bennett's injury real? Yes, Bennett's injury was real. The situation was obviously a little shady. Question number 3, Josh Rosen declares. I think it's a fair bet that Josh Rosen and Josh Allen will both declare for the 2018 NFL Draft. I think that Sam Darnold's situation is way more up in the air, but I would expect that Josh Rosen and Josh Allen will declare. Number 4, is Harbaugh's job in Baltimore safe? Yes, I think his job in Baltimore. I do not think he'll be fired in Baltimore. Is there potentially a situation where he could maybe move on in the next year or two? I wouldn't rule that out. He would be clearly one of the hottest coaches on the market if he were somehow available, and he has been in Baltimore now for a decade. Question number 5, this will be my last question. Okay, Darnold says your report of him staying in school is false. Comments. We'll finish there. I never reported that Darnold said that the Cleveland Browns would be keeping him in school. I never said that. It got out there after I was on the air with Colin Cowherd. He asked me a question about the Browns and Sam Darnold and whether or not that could influence his decision. And what I said was, and this is a pretty simple answer, from my understanding is this is a very conscientious kid who's got good family around him, who's going to take absolutely everything into account when making his decision. That includes how ready he feels like he is, what his situation is going to be like at USC going forward, and potentially what NFL situations he could be walking into. And so that's part of the decision-making process for him. Additionally, I've heard that he has, over the course of this entire season, shut down draft talks. So he's not talking to potential agents. He's not talking to his coaches about the NFL. He has tried to make it so all the focus is on his 2017 season with the USC Trojans. I still think the decision's up in the air. We'll see which way he goes. There are a number of factors that could obviously swing this. I appreciate all you guys coming out. I'll give you one bonus question. Info on John Fox getting fired. I do think that will happen between now and the end of the year. Again, I always appreciate the feedback. You guys can get me on Facebook. You can actually message me on Facebook. That's at Albert R. Breer on Facebook. You can get me on my Twitter page at Albert Breer. I want all your feedback. Tell me what you think we're doing right, what you think we're doing wrong, both with this podcast and the podcast that we do that pops on Friday mornings. We're trying to make this as interactive as we possibly can for you guys. So I appreciate you guys coming out always. And always remember to listen to the MMQB 10 Things podcast, the MMQB podcast with Peter King. And one more time, this podcast, the MMQB podcast with Albert Breer, both the Friday edition, the conventional Friday edition, and this edition, the YouTube edition, which goes up again every week on YouTube, on Periscope, and on iTunes. You can also get our podcast and the other MMQB podcasts on Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, wherever you get your podcasts. Next week, same time, we'll be there. You guys join us then.